Hi, everyone.
Yay!
Hi.
Hello, hello.
So excited to be here with you all and Dr. Taz. I'm sure you guys have heard Whitney and I talk about this idea of what it means to sit in the driver's seat of your health. And one of the reasons we love talking about it, well, there are several reasons. One is for the longest time, we didn't know how to sit in the driver's seat of our health. And Sakara and understanding nourishment and gut health were really some of the things that helped us understand what it means to own your health, to be able to turn the dials on your health and how you feel in your body. Another way that really allowed us to sit in the driver's seat of our health is knowing a lot of information about our health. And so one of the reasons we love the podcast and love these evenings with you guys is so that we can all learn together, so that you can know your body, know what it looks like, what it feels like when it's feeling really good and healthy. And also so that when you go to your medical practitioners, you can understand what questions to ask. I personally, I'm sure you too, Whit, I get asked all the time, like, what doctor do you recommend for this, for this, for this? And unfortunately, there aren't a ton of doctors that I can personally recommend. One, because I like to see them before I recommend them, or at least have them on the podcast so I can really understand their approach. But also many times they're not covered by insurance. And so one of the things you can do is come equipped to, the practitioners you're already seeing with knowledge, with the right questions. And so I'm so happy to have you all here today and to also welcome Dr. Taz. This is Dr. Taz's third time on the Sakara Life podcast, so you know she's a favorite and covers the topic which many of you always ask us about: hormonal health, menopause, all of the different chapters of our lives, especially as women. So Dr. Taz takes an integrative approach, and Dr. Taz is a double, wow, your bio, lady. Okay, ready? Dr. Taz is a double board certified integrative medicine physician and a preeminent expert in hormonal health. Faced with personal health challenges in her 20s and a dismissive healthcare system, Dr. Taz turned to nutrition, homeopathy, and Eastern medical wisdom for answers. Passionate to share this new knowledge, she opened the CentreSpring MD in Atlanta. She's a nationally recognized holistic and integrative medical doctor. And 15 years later, she has scaled her practice and opened locations across LA, New York City, along with an expanded global telehealth platform. Dr. Taz has been a recurring guest on the Sakara Life podcast, and most recently discussed her latest book, The Hormone Shift, which if you haven't listened to that episode, it's a really good one. So we're so excited to have you here, Dr. Taz.
Thank you.
Double certified badass.
Oh, thank you. I think I was frozen there for a second. So I was like, let me restart it. Thank you, guys. I'm so excited to be with you. It's always such a treat. And I think I remember meeting both of you at Mind Body Green when I was very early in this journey and being, totally wowed with what you guys were doing then. And it's been kind of fun to grow together in a weird way, right? Across the years. And a lot of time has gone by, 15 years almost. Yeah. But it's all been so joyful and so rewarding. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we're so happy to have you, and especially on this, topic of hormones, which from everything, I've learned in my, education, hormones are critical, but they're also so downstream. And it's one of the reasons, we love to have you on, is because you take such a holistic approach. You're not just looking, at hormones like as a root cause. It's like, okay, our hormones are telling us this story. And so what can that tell us about other things? But before we dive into all of the things we're going to talk about this evening, we like to start out with this question. It helps us kind of ground into like what you're doing overall and what personally matters to you. So what is your mission here on Earth? What are you here to do? What are you here to give, teach, however you want to answer?
Oh my goodness, I love that question. I feel like it's a little bit of a loaded question. I think at the deepest level, honestly, it's honestly to heal the family, like to heal families and help. I feel like the family is dying in a weird way. So I want to really play a role in helping piece that back together. But I'm doing it through the lens of medicine. And what's more probably relatable and understandable is I feel like medicine needs to change. I feel like I'm here to change medicine, to change the delivery of medicine, how we think about health and healing. And that's tied to this mission of healing the family, because so many people, men, women, children, are kind of bumping around in this new environment without answers. And I kind of feel like I watch things implode in front of me constantly when it kind of didn't have to be that way. So I feel like changing medicine was always the goal, but now changing medicine to heal the family, I think is the new mission.
Can you talk to us about, just to kind of get 101 for a second, like what are hormones? What do they do? People love to talk about them, but I'm not always sure they understand kind of exactly what they do and why.
I think the easiest way to picture a hormone is just to think of it as a messenger. It's like a messenger molecule, right? It's sort of, delivering information to different systems of the body, different aspects of the body. It plays a huge role in how we think, how we feel, of course, our reproductive health, and so much more. But I think at the end of the day, they're messenger molecules. And we're so used to, I think we think the word hormone and we think pelvis, right? Like I feel like hormone.
All your sex hormones.
Exactly. I'm just thinking kind of down here and nowhere else. But that's just such a fallacy. This is a messenger that's going from one area of the body to the next, being absorbed and processed in different ways, really telling different systems what to do. And we need to really take this more global view of hormones rather than thinking, okay, uterus, ovaries, check. That's the end of the hormone conversation.
And what does it mean to balance your hormones? Is that something that's actually possible? What does that mean to you?
I love that. That's such a great question. So balancing your hormones just means being in alignment, right? Being where your hormones are working for you and they're not working against you, right? When hormones are in the right place, they're a superpower. I've said that so many times. You feel amazing. You're clear. You can accomplish things. You can focus. You can concentrate. You can sleep. You can have sex, all the things, right? But when they don't work for you, or when they're out of balance or not in alignment, they can undo you and undo the people around you and really impact your relationships and even your goals. I mean, I love watching patients in their journeys. I think it's part of what keeps me moving. But it's so fascinating. You'll get somebody to a good place and all of a sudden they're like, wait, I think I'm going to go back to school, or I'm going to start that business, or I have the energy now to have a third child, or whatever it is they want to do, right? But I think, being in balance, having hormone balance is about being in alignment and having a superpower in your hands rather than something that's really sort of, making you weak or not yourself.
I've been thinking about this theme lately of full expression, and it can mean a lot of different things for different people, but, they say like the opposite of depression is not like joy or happiness. It's full expression.
I love that.
And, when your hormones are not working properly, I can't think of, something kind of more in the way of full expression, because you really, truly don't feel like yourself. If like, God forbid you break an arm or, have to have oral surgery, whatever the thing is, there are lots of things that are uncomfortable. And of course we want to avoid, but I think hormones are particular, and then they can really convince you that you are someone that you're not.
Totally.
Like you're lazy, or you are just always going to have acne, or you can never have children, or, whatever the things are. But that when we can get them in balance and we have the opportunity to, that they can help us find our full expression.
Very much so. I was reading something recently, and this is just a testament to the power of hormones. After menopause, when there's a state of hormone depletion, 50% of women are depressed. 50%. Yeah. And that's just, such a block. They isolate, they don't participate, they think that they're done or they're old or it's over. That's all hormonal stuff telling them that. And none of that is true, but I study this stuff all the time, but I didn't realize that number was that high. 50% of women postmenopause are depressed, And so if that's not a statistic about hormones, I don't know what is, in terms of how it makes us present in the world and how it makes us feel.
I think there's a lot of biology to that, but I also think there's a lot of cultural circumstances behind that.
True.
Like I think about what it felt like to become a mother. I became a mother in 2018. And it was kind of like in the early days of moms being like cool and, you could be a sexy mom. And I think about like when my mom had me and it was like you couldn't talk about fertility issues and not to say any of these issues like don't have taboos and it might be hard to talk about them, but we're talking about a lot of them more than ever.
Yeah.
And I feel like mothers are embraced in society in a way that they just weren't when my mom became a mom. And I think that we have a long way to go when it comes to women hitting perimenopause, menopause, that, women in particular are taught that, our value is associated with our age, with our reproductive rights, with, whatever, being attractive or desired or whatever it is. And so though I know there's so much biology behind that. I actually have a dear friend who's going through perimenopause and is severely depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of it is that she doesn't feel like what she is becoming is going to be something that is like desired in the world. So that's so interesting too, to just think about how, even though it's biology, it's also circumstances are so important.
It is.
Like community.
I'm so passionate about merging the East with the West. It's such a part of my background. It's a part of the medicine I've studied too. But one thing about Eastern cultures, which is interesting and fascinating, is that you sort of, each phase of life is held on a pedestal in a way. Yeah. And by the time you get to menopause or even post-menopause, you're sort of the matriarch, right? You're like the power figure in a family. You kind of call the shots to a certain extent, for better or for worse. But those guys, and in my book, The Hormone Shift, I call them the commanders, because the way it was supposed to work is that we were evolving, decade to decade, shift by shift. We were getting stronger, better, savvier, more spiritually aware, all of these things. And so by the time you hit your 50s or your 60s, you were in a position of power, and your power was to be used to influence the family, to be of support, to influence a community, all of those different things. And I think what had happened, which I think I'm hoping is shifting and changing, because I meet so many badass women after 50, both just from a media celebrity standpoint and then just day to day, who are doing incredible things. Like there's a woman who I know who just went to medical school at like 55, so there are these women that are doing such amazing things. So I definitely think it's shifting, but it's only shifting very slowly and recently. But what's happened in the past is sort of this idea that you became a mom and you sort of gave yourself to this family unit and to this role of being a mom. Maybe you worked, maybe you didn't, depending on how your life was playing out. But once you were done being a mom and no longer sexually viable, right, or physically in a certain place, you had no value, and you, like many women, feel like they're invisible, or, if maybe you were used to getting a lot of attention, now suddenly like nobody opens the door for you anymore. Like a lot of these like very subtle things that take place as we age and get older, but I think women need to understand, that was all there. I think, who told me this? I think it was Gabby Reese, the volleyball player. She said this, and I think she said it beautifully. She said all of that stuff was there, all that attention, all that catcalling, all that like, look at how I look stuff. It was there biologically and evolutionary wise for the purpose of fertility. So if it's gone now, good riddance. Do you really want to have another baby right now? Like, come on, guys. Why are we getting upset about this? So, she has just a fun perspective on it. But I think it's, again, that value that society has historically placed on the way a woman looks, if she can reproduce, and after that, her story was kind of over. But I think women are really changing, and it's exciting it's really exciting to see that paradigm being rewritten again.
Yeah. And also like stepping into wise woman, we talked about this. I think it might've been with Gabby Bernstein, but this idea of like when you are, in your fertile window and, before perimenopause, it's like you have that monthly cycle and your emotions go with it. And that could be part of what it means to be, a mother, to be able to be empathic, to be able to be emotional, to be able to ride the waves. But then as you lose that, over time through perimenopause and menopause, it allows you to stay more calm, and that is what is becoming the wise woman that I think in American culture is very, as you said, like underappreciated, undervalued.
Very underappreciated. But again, you know what, a part of that underappreciation is going back to the family unit. We don't live in extended families. We don't live in multi-generational families, right? So it's sort of like going to see grandma as a chore, right? Or it's like this thing you do, but it's not integrated into the fabric of your day-to-day life. Whereas, and I have opinions about all of that in both directions, you know, but like my mother-in-law actually did live with us for about 8 years or so before she passed away. So my children have very strong feelings and sentiments about her that I don't have about my grandparents because they didn't live with us and they were off in another country, you know? So I think there is a lot, to your original point, there's a lot to culture and to circumstance with how we feel. And I think getting away from that big picture and getting down to like a micro level too, I think when women don't feel loved and supported, that process of change is more daunting, right? So it's different to walk through this journey when you have a partner that you feel safe with and you feel 100% accepted by, or if you have a career that you feel so good about, right? You've got these anchors kind of to help you weather, you know, the changes that are happening. But I think for women, again, with society shifting and changing and the structure of the family changing, more women hitting 40 and 50 and finding themselves divorced or single or in unusual family circumstances, right? That's just a lot harder, honestly. You know, it's much harder.
Yeah, it's where community outside of the family structure becomes important, really important. And with kind of, you know, people maybe not going to church on a regular basis, where are they finding these communities? Right. I think that's a big reason why we, you know, started our online Slack community, why we have these types of events, is to give people the opportunity to meet other like-minded people and start to form that community if they don't have it for themselves wherever they live. But I'm curious, you know, what is happening from a scientific perspective inside the body during those perimenopause years. And then Danielle and I were having a debate about what menopause is, if it's one moment in time or if it's just, you know, after you stop having a cycle.
Well, all of it is a process, is probably the best way to describe it. So I would say, let's answer the first question. What is happening during perimenopause? So during perimenopause, you're starting to see a couple of different hormone shifts. You're starting to see full expression of a hormone shift that may have been present early on, even as young as your teens and early 20s, to be quite honest, and we're just not picking up on it. But now it's very exaggerated. And that first hormone shift is the drop in progesterone. And that drop in progesterone, in turn, is triggering a lot of the classic perimenopause symptoms. Everything from anxiety, trouble sleeping, that 2 to 4 o'clock wake up, those heart palpitations, you know, and then in some women, depending on your genetics, that drop in progesterone is triggering other changes like high cortisol, high androgens, high blood sugar, high insulin, all of these other things. And so that mix of just the change from that one hormone, right, that is the first transition, changes who you are. You know, it presents in so many different ways. But then as perimenopause continues, you move on to now a drop in estrogen. So you have the drop in progesterone and the drop in estrogen as well. So this is now going to be a lot of like shorter cycles, heavier cycles. People see fibroids, things like adenomyosis, uterine polyps, like all these different, you know, signs and symptoms that are taking place. Breast tenderness, breast polyps, you know, so many different high estrogen, low estrogen type symptoms. But at the same time, your other systems like your gut and your liver and things like that are a little bit more sluggish. They're not like, you know, doing the work that they were able to do at one point in time. So all these hormone levels are coming down, both estrogen and progesterone. A lot of the metabolites are getting stored. So you could be low estrogen at times in perimenopause, but still have estrogen dominance. At the same time, because there's so much wonkiness, you can have sudden spikes in estrogen, which present with a bunch of different symptoms and have the same pattern of estrogen dominance. So this interplay between estrogen and progesterone is typically what gets thrown off the most dramatically when you hit perimenopause. And every woman in perimenopause, there's a reason where it's not like a blanket prescription for everybody, because everybody's in a different phase there. Some just have the low progesterone. Some have sudden high surges of estrogen. Some have bottoming out estrogen. Some have both or all three. Some have high stored estrogen. So really trying to understand what's happening there with you and where you're entering this journey is important. So that's like the train that starts to drive everything else. And because of those changes, everybody else gets impacted. Insulin, blood sugar, thyroid, testosterone, like all these other guys get impacted as well. And you start to see the fallout from that. So that's the classic, I'm in hormone hell. I'm not myself. I don't recognize myself. That's a lot of, what you're hearing there. Now, when it comes to menopause is a further exaggeration of that. So there's depletion of now progesterone completely, depletion of estrogen. Meanwhile, things like your FSH and LH, which are numbers that are very easy to check, are getting higher and higher. Your classic sort of OBGYN definition is that there are multiple phases to menopause. There's sort of late perimenopause, then there's this early menopause transition phase, then there's like a mid-menopause phase, then there's a late menopause phase, there's a post-menopause phase. So depending on who you are, it's defined in multiple ways. The most common definition is no period for 1 year. That's the most common. The most technical definition is that your FSH, which we check, is greater than 25, more than 2 times of checking it. So that's more of a technical definition. But however you look at it, it is characterized by hormone depletion. And then that hormone depletion in turn leads to a lot of what women in menopause and postmenopause have to deal with.
And I love what you were saying earlier, where, it really is like taking care of ourselves in our 20s and 30s, and even 40s that help us with our perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms. But if, I guess for people in their 20s and 30s, what do you recommend as ways to kind of plan ahead? Whitney and I always say, like, when you're nourishing and taking care of yourself right now, it's not just for right now, it's for also years to come. But then also for those who are listening who are experiencing perimenopausal, menopausal symptoms, like what do you specifically recommend for hormonal health?
Definitely. And I love the question. A lot of my story I've told you guys before is about getting sick in my 20s, right? That's sort of where my PCOS was diagnosed. And looking back, I know hindsight's always 2020, but the signs and the patterns and all of it was there. I just didn't know about it. And so it's a part of why I'm so passionate about young women, our teenagers, women in their 20s, women in their early 30s, really having hormone literacy, really understanding what's happening with their body. I think it's just as important as knowing what your blood pressure is and your heart rate and all these other numbers that we track. So for the younger women listening, I would say get your hormones checked. You need to understand what's happening. And you're not checking them to find something wrong, right? That's not the motivation. You're checking them to understand what your normal is, what your superpowers look like, so that, maybe when you get 5 years down the road, or even after having a baby or further into perimenopause, and you're not feeling quite right, you can be like, oh my gosh, this is where I felt amazing. This is what it looked like. And you start to develop that knowledge about yourself, and you start to understand, that because the doctors, to your point of having a medical team, we have a long way to go. That's a part of why I want to change medicine. We have a long way to go to get every doctor on every street corner to be like, oh yeah, your progesterone's low. That's why you're doing that. We're not there yet, right? But if you can go in and be like, here's normal for me, this is way lower than where I normally am, then you're that advocate for yourself, armed with information that then a doctor, and we're all curious. Most doctors are curious. Most of us, are avid learners. We love to read all this stuff. They're going to be like, wait a minute, you're on to something. Let me work with you, right? So I think for young women, I want you guys to get your hormones checked. I think that's number one. I think number two is I want you to
you just define what that is? Because I think
getting
that's
your hormones checked? Absolutely. Yeah. That's yes.
And
thank
do you recommend
you.
the Dutch test? Do you recommend what do you tell people?
I get asked this all the time, and we're making this so hard. We're making it so hard. A Dutch test is beautiful information. It gets into detox pathways. It gets into genetics. It's amazing information. Does every woman have to do a Dutch test? No, absolutely not. you can do a basic hormone panel at LabCorp or Quest. And I actually have in my book, like all the different things you can check and all the reference ranges that you can use. And it gets covered by insurance. You can ask your doctor to run it. You can work with a provider to help you run it. And that's just a simple, easy way to do that. And if you're younger and you're interested in fertility, then you want to do that stuff around day 3 of your cycle. Otherwise, we don't even worry so much about what day you're on. We just want you to do it because then we can interpret the information as long as we know kind of where you were in your cycle roughly. So super easy to do. I don't think it's as hard as everyone's making it out to. And not everybody needs to do or has to do a Dutch test. It's a great test. We use that and a couple of others in practice. They're all great and we do them, but we're also doing a lot of follow-up on patients, and we also do a lot of primary care on patients. So we're not doing a Dutch test, every 4 months or every year. We'll do it once to get a good understanding, and then we'll move on from it. And there are many people who don't want to do it, and they want to stick to the LabCorp or the Quest type labs, and that's absolutely fine. So that's sort of what I mean when I say get your hormones checked. But I think the other follow-up, for younger women, and I'm even thinking about my daughter who's 16 now, is just being, aware of what's happening. Like your cycle should be regular. A 26 to 28 day, maybe 30-day cycle is really what you should be going for. And if you're falling on either side of that, then that's something to start to poke at and be like, well, why do I have a short cycle? Why do I have a long cycle? These are things to be aware of. And then I think being aware of how you're feeling, how do you feel mid-cycle? How do you feel the week before your period? How do you feel when you're on your period? And I think not dismissing yourself, right, as anxious or stressed or depressed or all these words that we use, not dismissing yourself that way, but being able to be like, oh my gosh, this only happens on day 7, or this only happens on day 14. And again, now you're armed with information to really help you with your own hormone literacy. So I think those are things that I would pass on to young women. And then if I had my way, every young woman would get a pelvic ultrasound, even whether or not you're trying to get pregnant, because that helps you pick up cysts and fibroids and thickened endometrial linings. And every woman would get screened for thyroid issues as well. So those are things that I think young women need to do. Now, going into perimenopause and menopause, and even for younger women, actually, I should say, the foundation when we take this east-west approach is a healthy gut, a healthy liver, and optimized nutrients, right? A lot of times, if you're just doing that work, then these hormone shifts, whether it's puberty to your 20s, postpartum, breastfeeding to whatever's next, perimenopause to menopause, they're not crazy waves. They're actually just little gentle, like kind of like bumps, that are easy to navigate. But when the gut's not healthy and when your liver's sort of overburdened and can't break down hormone metabolites and all these other things, and you're from a nutrient standpoint, depleted, there's a depletion state that they talk about in Chinese medicine. When all of that's coming together, then you're going to experience these swings of hormones in a much more dramatic and erratic way than someone who sort of laid this foundational work of a healthy gut and a healthy liver. So for women going to perimenopause and menopause, I would make sure that work is done. And for younger women, I would do a little bit around that work as well. You don't need a complicated plan, but you do want to start to pay attention to gut and liver health because that's setting your foundation for the future. And then at some point, what we typically do in practice with women in this transition is how much can we do with food? How much can we do with herbs and sort of natural things, supplements, that type of thing? And at what point do we have to enter and think about hormone replacement in some form or the other?
And then what about postmenopausal women? Are there hormone tests that they should be doing as well?
So with postmenopausal women, it's the same. If you are looking at, I was just reading about this today, actually, like postmenopausal women can have estrogen dominance. Many of them don't understand that because they think, oh, well, my estrogen's low. I'm postmenopause, but you can still have a lot of stored estrogen, either from body fat, from the environment, your own genetics, the little tiny bit you're making, turning around and getting stored because your gut and your liver are not working as well as they need to. So postmenopausal women should be checking, again, estradiol, estrone, progesterone, testosterone. And one of the biggest disservices we do to postmenopausal women is we're not checking androgens, because a lot of postmenopausal women shift to this androgen dominant profile, which is higher than normal levels of testosterone, androstenedione, DHT, and they'll present with a lot of high androgen symptoms, weight gain being one of them. But it's never treated and it's never identified, so they struggle. So yes, postmenopausal women need thorough hormone checks as well, for sure.
And is that one thing that women can do? Like, is weight gain just part of menopause or not?
The reason weight gain is a part of menopause is because with the hormone decline, there's a rise in blood sugar and a rise in cortisol. So many women never had an issue with blood sugar, always had low A1Cs, always had low cholesterol levels. But as they start to lose their hormones, those numbers start to go up. Not to a disease state necessarily, but they start to go up. And at the same time, they do start to see a lot more belly fat. So managing blood sugar becomes the primary goal for women in any hormone shift, for sure, but definitely for women in menopause, because their chemistry is just primed for them to gain weight, have that visceral fat, have that belly fat. So that's why anything you can do to bring blood sugar down, whether it's protein, eating consistently, sleeping, right? Exercising and building and maintaining muscle mass becomes really important, but not at the expense. It's interesting with everything out there and everyone pushing protein and pushing heavy weights, not to the point where you're crashing out again, right? Like,
you're high cortisol again.
You're high cortisol, you're right back at square one, you're at high cortisol. So it's trying to get into that like mid-range, they call it zone 2, right? Where, you're not pushing the limits of cortisol, but you are active, you are metabolically active. And I think the recommendation, that we're all agreeing on is it's anywhere from 300 minutes of activity per week. So that's at least an hour of activity almost every day, getting out there and moving your body. We don't have the luxury anymore of sitting, and many of us are in professions where we sit quite a bit. But, those are just things to be aware of as you move into menopause, for sure.
Getting enough fiber.
Fiber's a big one.
Fiber
is for
helps
sure
your
a big
gut,
one.
helps your liver, and helps the blood sugar.
Fiber is huge. And then, I can go through a million different studies, but one of the biggest issues is that the microbiome changes, right? With the hormone change, the microbiome changes. There's something called the estrobolome, which is how we eat up estrogen, move it through. And when the hormones shift, the gut actually gets a little bit sluggish as well. And we see in menopausal women that they don't have good populations of certain gut bacteria. So ruminococcus is one of them, in which we need from the fiber, right? Akkermansia is another one. So if you're not getting whole food, right, real food, and you're really not getting, the probiotics and the good bacteria that you need to sort of keep this blood sugar insulin piece kind of where it needs to be.
Right. And with the liver, one of our pillars of nutrition at Sakara is to get sulfur-rich vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
So really supporting that liver and the liver detoxification process that becomes so important at this phase, at every phase in life, but especially during perimenopause. And it's also one of the reasons why, I've given up alcohol. Like, going into pregnancy and everything, I gave it up and just, I tried it out again postpartum and it didn't really sit the same.
Yeah.
And so,
same.
But I think about it now from the perspective of my liver and also of my gut health, that alcohol, it's a disinfectant, right? And what do we have in our gut? All those really important microbes. So, that, and then if we have clients that come to me asking about hormonal imbalance, and often when people hop onto Sakara, they'll ask, is it okay to drink coffee? And if they're wanting to improve their hormonal health, I typically say to not drink coffee, as it has to be processed by the liver and detoxed through the liver. And if you're really wanting to focus on supporting your hormonal health, to give it a try getting off of coffee. So many of us, we just drink it every single day without even thinking about it twice.
It is kind of one of the worst hormone habits, right? I think that and the glass of wine nightly are probably the two, most devastating hormone habits, because the morning coffee, first thing in the morning, especially if you're experiencing a hormone shift, right, you probably have some level of blood sugar instability. And then we're trying to clean this liver up. So we're taking blood sugar up, and insulin up with the coffee, kind of moving through the day in this higher cortisol state. And then when we hit nighttime, we're getting the alcohol and that type of stuff in our system. And for many women, it will make them have hot flashes and night sweats, throughout the night. And it's just so aggravating.
Right. And it's definitely individual. Like I think Danielle's constitution, she can handle it a lot better than I can.
Yeah.
But I think it's something to test out.
Totally.
I also think it's the joy factor. Like, I mean, you look across like European cultures, I'm like, been drinking wine for thousands of years. And I just think but it's part of the culture. It's when you're with community. It's when you're having fun.
Totally.
Like, if I'm drinking a bottle of wine by myself, that's probably a signal.
Not the best idea.
I'm not doing well. And that's not the time to drink. So I also think context is so important. And I think it's part of American culture to villainize certain things and then also make other certain things, like idolize them. Right. Like, right now it's protein. Point. And when we started Sakara, it was plants. And then people took it too far. And then they were eating Oreos are made of plants. And now with protein is going far. And people are like, protein ice cream. And I'm like, it's nutritionism at its best. And this is why we talk about body intelligence, because if you know what truly makes you feel good, like there's nothing more powerful than yes, there are nights where a glass of wine with my husband, we stay up late after putting the kids down. Like it just brings so much joy that it's so worth it for me.
Yeah.
But I think, it's all about context and where you are. And I also think that we can get into this place of hyperfixation of and not hyperfixation in that way, but like where we want to fix all the things instead of realizing, I see this all the time, of like, it actually is simpler than we make it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like focus on whole foods. Eat a lot of plants. It's like Michael Pollan's whole approach. It's like, eat. I don't remember exactly.
Eat real foods, mostly plants. Not too much.
Not too much. But I'd also add Mark Bittman talks about this, like making it with community. It's like the thing, but we don't, right? So we don't do any of that. And then we focus on macros and sometimes micros and then what not to eat. And then we become obsessed with it. And then the joy is gone from all of it. So I think context is really important. But to get back to the hormonal discussion specifically around, so we've talked about perimenopause, menopause. You talked about some things to do for younger women to understand their hormonal health. You personally went through PCOS. I know there's some other things, hormonal issues that specifically happen to women. So like something like PCOS, hypothyroidism, even things like breast cancer. What are things that you see a lot in younger women that you think get missed a lot? Because I know PCOS gets missed a lot.
Yeah.
I know thyroid issues get missed a lot. So what are just some common things that younger women should look out for and ask their doctors about?
Definitely. I mean, I think endometriosis gets missed quite a bit too. It's sort of the sister diagnosis to PCOS, right? But I mean, I think, heavy periods, painful periods, rectal pain with your period, these are all things where endometriosis should be thought about in the context of what's happening overall. I feel like hair loss, that kind of got me into this whole game. And I think, that's something that still sort of gets dismissed in younger women. I think, we now have explanations for women, in their, 40s or 50s because they're having the hormone changes. But I think in younger women, I'm seeing it more and more in practice. I think that's something that often gets dismissed but needs to be taken seriously because it could be a sign of like a thyroid issue or PCOS or some of these other things as well. We're seeing a lot of multifactorial hormone things. I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, but we're seeing a lot of things that are sort of influencing each other. So for example, we're seeing a lot of MCAS, which is, mast cell activating syndrome, where you have a really high histamine response and you have all these hives everywhere and you're reacting to everything. A lot of that's hormonally rooted. We're seeing a lot of autoimmune disease that shows up out of nowhere, hormonally rooted or connected to a hormone shift. And here I'm talking about lupus, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, all of those guys.
Hashimoto's.
So there are a lot of different conditions. And then not to be like, I don't like to be negative, but like the rate of cancer in younger women is going up. And so I do think that is something, women and men, I should say, I do think that is something that we've kind of got to sit up a little bit and pay attention to, because that may not just be a hormone story, but it may be a story around this detox issue where, because we're absorbing hormones from the environment and from so many different places, again, that liver can't do the work that it used to be able to do. So it needs some support. It needs some help to move everything through.
Yeah. And what about, before we get to Q&A, I heard you talk about your 16-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
I have a daughter, and I read that like the average age used to be 11 when they would hit puberty, and now it's closer to 8. Is that right?
Yes.
I mean, that's crazy.
It's
and
beyond crazy.
What
it's
can
ridiculous.
we do, as mothers and as a society to make sure that doesn't happen? Because that definitely could possibly impact fertile windows.
Definitely. I do think it's a big problem, and it's not getting enough attention. But, I think one of the things, if you're seeing early puberty signs in your children, whether that's, hair kind of below or breast buds or, armpit hair, things like that, way before, or even body odor. That's another, a more common one that folks can pick up on. Then there is a way to stop it. You have to clean up the liver. You have to really replace all the processed and all the fast foods. Those endocrine disrupting chemicals, I think, are such a crime. They make me so angry. I feel like they're really probably primarily, that and glyphosate are probably primarily responsible for this hormone shift that we're seeing in our children and in our teenagers. So the earlier and the faster you can clean up their food and their nutrition, that's the best. And then something to support the liver. And there's a whole toolbox of liver support, everything from glutathione to milk thistle to dandelion tea to greens. I mean, there's lots of different things, but something to support the liver. And we've actually been successful at blocking progression of puberty in patients that are coming to us on time by really dealing with patterns of estrogen dominance that we're finding in youngsters and cutting it, with different, we have different protocols for that, and being able to block it so that they can get to 11, 12, 13 before they actually start. But it is something to be aware of. And I love that you brought that up.
And you talked a lot about estrogen dominance today. What are some signs of estrogen dominance that people can look out for? Because it sounds like, I know there's a lot of pathways for estrogen dominance. Like even if you're like you're constipated, that can be a path to estrogen dominance. So there's a lot of things people don't think of. And so what are some signs to look out for?
And I would also keep in mind that estrogen dominance can show up in your boys and your girls. It's not just a female issue, right? So, early breast buds, I would say that's a sign. I would say a lot of visceral fat, like fat around the abdomen in our youngsters and even in our teenagers, that's going to be a sign as well. In our girls, we can look for things like breast tenderness and migraines. Those are common signs. Heavy periods, periods that are all over the place. Those are other painful periods, PMS and PMDD. And we didn't even talk about the mental health component of this. PMDD is a big symptom of estrogen dominance, and actually one of the biggest disorders that I see with sort of this hormone issue and hormone imbalance, so to speak, in youngsters, where there's a lot of mental health stuff tied to different levels of hormones and hormones not being in balance and not being in alignment.
Wow. Well, we could definitely continue the conversation, but I know we have a lot of questions. So let's try and get to a few, and then we'll end with some light work. So,
I think let's just let's just start at the top. Question from Liz. She asks, anything I should be doing during my perimenopause phase so that menopause won't be as bad as my mom had it? Currently, I get occasional hot flashes at night. That's about it. Some fibroids and an ovarian cyst, heavy bleeding for 1 day. I would love any tips on how to minimize them. Plus, what kind of exercise do you recommend for perimenopause?
Okay, so much there. So, okay, tips to not have the same menopause that your mom had. I think really focus first on gut and liver health. Let's make sure you're using the bathroom consistently, you're getting enough fiber, your microbiome is balanced, so you're getting a good broad spectrum probiotic. If you want to do that type of testing, that's available, but at least getting something in, I think, is helpful. And that you're getting in the healthy fats. And one of the biggest things, too, I keep seeing in women in perimenopause and going into menopause is that you guys we are all losing digestive enzymes. So taking enzymes with some lipase and a little bit of hydrochloric acid will help that gut get a little bit healthier too. I think I would look at your overall diet and where are there opportunities, again, not to fixate, but to just clean up a little bit. Are there things that you can connect back to hot flashes? I can connect sugar and alcohol in 2 seconds back to a hot flash very easily. Do you have that same experience, or it might be spicy foods for you? I think understanding that becomes critically important. And then, if you're having those heavy periods and some of what you're talking about with cysts and ovaries and things like that, you may benefit actually from some bioidentical progesterone now, so that as you get into menopause, that is balanced a little bit better to make your menopause transition easier. I think there was a second question.
And exercise during perimenopause.
Exercise, that's right. So exercise during perimenopause, we didn't have time to get into this, but you kind of have to correlate to what your cortisol levels, your sleep, and your HRV are doing. If you have not slept through the night, exercise needs to be in the zone 1, zone 2 range, which is walking, yoga, swimming, medium weight, something like Pilates or something along those lines. If you've slept well and you're in a good cortisol phase, I define that sometimes by HRVs or your heart rate variability, and that's in the 40s and 50s, and you can do a few days of heavy weights and more intense cardio, but that's whole I'm going to run 5 miles every day, or I'm going to do heavy weight lifting 3 and 4 days a week, not the best if you're having all the other perimenopause shifts. It can really wear the body down much faster, and you can injure yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, it's like, if you start in your 20s really getting to know, we call it body intelligence, like getting to know your body, that comes in handy so much. I mean, talk about through pregnancy, postpartum, but also through perimenopause, menopause. So exactly as you're saying, you can start to understand when what your triggers are. But I think specifically, Dr. Taz, what you mentioned is so important around exercise, which is to know when you're overdoing it. I think women have been taught that exercise every day as hard as you can. I was definitely that person.
Me too.
And my body has changed so much by just doing simple Pilates a couple times a week. I sometimes don't even sweat in my Pilates classes. I'm all right with that. It's it's and then long walks, and it's my joints feel great. My body feels great. I'm taller, I'm leaner. And just getting that out of your head that you should live in a stressed out place, because
situation,
exactly. So another one from Jenny. I recently completed 4 weeks of Sakara's signature program. Yay. For a couple of years now, I've had severe migraines for at least 2 weeks around my period. That didn't happen this month of Sakara. Wow. My period was normal without migraines.
Love it.
I regularly follow a vegan, lower processed diet. I do have gluten. What can I include to help my migraines when I'm not on Sakara? I know they use a lot of nuts and seeds, and I've heard of seed cycling.
Seed cycling is a great idea. I love that idea. I think magnesium is found in a lot of different seeds and nuts. And so that's one indirect way of getting some extra magnesium in, and then your leafy greens. So sometimes I'll just say, do 1 green smoothie every single day. If you're not on a plan like Sakara, maybe that's a way to get a lot of those greens in and get them in. And then you could seed cycle. You could add a little bit of magnesium as well.
And then I'll throw in get a sulfur-rich vegetable, maybe a cruciferous veggie every single day.
And I will add, for Dr. Taz talked about gut health, and the number one indicator of gut health is microbial diversity. And how you do that is getting a diverse diet. And so, as someone who, tries to eat healthy when I don't have Sakara, and I know how hard it is to try and reach for new recipes, new things to eat. I try and tell people every time you go grocery shopping to pick up a few fruits and vegetables you either have never had or haven't had in a long time, because we're creatures of habit, and we tend to reach for the same things.
And our fiber super powder has 10 different whole food sources of fiber.
And 7 added grams, and it's delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's do one more. Ironically, this is from Michelle. I just purchased the Oro Wellness Gluteral from the CentreSpring online store.
Oh, no
What's the best way to use it, frequency, where to spray, etc.?
So I usually say spray it on the wrist is probably the easiest.
Can you explain what it is?
And what are the benefits?
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So it is our favorite Mac Daddy glutathione that is going to be non-IV, right? I love IV glutathione. I swear by it. Glutathione is an antioxidant. One of the biggest issues, I was lecturing on this earlier today with hormone shifts, is chronic inflammation that's triggered by a hormone shift and oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is this idea that each of like your cells and your mitochondria are not just getting the energy they need. And for busy women that maybe are on planes a lot, or you're experiencing a hormone shift, oxidative stress is very real, presents as fatigue, muscle weakness, brain fog, so much more. So we love glutathione for that piece of it. We also love glutathione for supporting the liver. Most of us recommend or try to get glutathione in from, again, good, clean food, right? Our greens, our lean poultry and things like that have glutathione in it. But, being busy and trying to get food in as usual can be challenging. So the glutathione spray is one of our favorites, and we use it in kids and adults. So you can do 2 sprays twice a day as an adult, 1 spray daily for a child. And we're just upping that sort of internal sort of level of glutathione that you have so that you can detox well, you can support the liver, and we can improve oxidative stress.
And if you're doing an IV glutathione, how often do you recommend those?
It's really patient dependent and what's going on with the patient. If you're just doing it for prevention, we don't have anything active like that we're working on. We just know that you run low in glutathione. Then I usually say monthly. Somebody like me that's jumping on planes constantly, I actually try to do it twice a month. And then if you're in a transition of any kind, postpartum, high stress, whatever it is, then you may want to do it weekly.
Great. Very cool. Great. And I didn't know glutathione could be transdermal.
Yeah, it actually
is hard to take.
It is hard to take. And there's a lot of questions around bioavailability when we take it via pill or orally. So this is supposed to be like one of the highest quality, best of, transdermal, better than oral absorption of glutathione.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Dr. Taz. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
Yes,
so good to see
you. Before you go, we
yes,
have to ask you the same question that we always ask, which is, can you offer some light work to our Sakara Light listeners today?
Light work. I love this. I think I would love for the Sakara Life listeners to start to become aware of something called their HRV or heart rate variability. By paying attention, there are multiple ways to do it. You can use the Oura Ring. It's on your not your iWatch, your Apple Watch.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at it in either of those places, because what I really want is for you guys to understand where your cortisol levels are on any given day. Mm-hmm. Because I think if you can start to understand that, then you can start to craft a diet that works for you, an exercise plan that works for you, the supplements or herbs that you may need on that particular day or phase of the month or hormone phase of where you are. So I would say that's my first task. I think the second is not to plug my book, but know your hormones, right? There's a hormone quiz in there. Find your dominant hormone pattern, understand the magic of you, like where are hormones your superpower? Where do you need help and support? And where do you actually need to make an appointment to figure it all out? I hope that's light work. Or is that heavy work?
Little both. It's good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Taz.
Thank you, guys. So good to see you both.
Yeah, you too. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We're so grateful to have you here live today. And thank you to all our listeners. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.
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 Bye.